Okay, so today I'm going to be working on the Mandarin Drake duck in Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils. I'm doing this project here for the Art of the Carolinas, and we traced the light, very light outline. You can see just very, very tiny outline, only really for the duck. The rest of the background is all going to be watercolor, so it really doesn't matter if it's not perfect. I'm going to let the watercolor determine how it gets, the design that gets laid out in the background. So I have right here the Mandarin duck, and I'm using an iPad for a reference. This is just a board that is being used that my husband made me that sits on top of the desk so that when I slide it across, it does not touch my paper. And I like the iPad because I can zoom in. I can get it as close as I want, and you probably can't see the line drawing very well, but this is about to scale right here. If for any reason I feel like it's not to scale, I can screenshot this picture and then open that screenshot and make it a little bigger, because it only goes to a certain size and then it just kind of goes back down. So depending on your digital device that you're using, whether you're using an iPhone or an iPad, or even just a computer screen, you can zoom in and try to get it to scale so that it matches your drawing. And I try to keep my reference photo pretty close. If you're really new to drawing, keep your reference photo this close, and where I can show you the pencil where the eye starts about right here. Keep it very, very close. If you are not that new and you feel pretty confident with your proportions and you're able to draw what you see, you can keep it completely out of the way. I've been drawing for 2.5 years, probably 30 to 40 hours a week. So I'm pretty comfortable with being able to keep my proportions. I'm not worried about my line drawing as much. Even without a line drawing, I feel confident that I can draw what I see. So depending on your skill set, you can keep your reference very close or keep it further apart. But I'm going to show you how to do that lay on the Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils. And instead of doing all the color like I normally would and then go back with the water, I'm going to just do a section and then with the water. And that's because I'm trying to use a teaching tool. Now, typically I would put all of my Albrecht Durer color pencils down first. Then I would go back with my watercolor brush and start adding the water. This is not how we're going to do it. So you're going to watch me do a section here. I'm probably going to make this about a 20 or 25 minute session of showing you how to do this. So we'll see how far we can get with the watercolor pencils in that time frame. So to start with, you always are going to use a piece of glassine paper just like you would if you were drawing with polychromos. So the glassine paper is used the same way it is with the polychromos. It's laid onto the paper so that your wrist or your hand is resting on the glassine and not on the actual paper. This paper is cold press aqua paper by its Stonehenge, but it's cold press aqua paper specifically designed for watercolor by Legion Paper, the same company that makes Stonehenge paper. So I am going to start, to begin with, let me explain to you what I'm having to do. Because this is a workshop that I designed in advance, I actually wrote up the colors that I was going to use and everything before I ever even created the drawing. And I had to do that because I needed to know what pencils to ask for sponsorship. In this case, Faber-Castell is sponsoring the workshop at Art of the Carolinas. So they send me all the pencils I need for the students. That way I can give the students the pencils at Art of the Carolinas and they can actually take the pencils home with them. So I had a predetermined number of pencils. I have exactly 21 colored pencils. They're Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils that I know I'm going to be using for this piece. So I have no choice but to use these 21 colors. If I see anything else that I need, I have to make it with these because I've already committed myself to these 21 colors. So what I'm going to do is pick the best color, and because it's a watercolor and it's a duck that's very colorful, we have a lot of leeway. I can make things look whatever I want them to look like and kind of use my imagination if I want to. So I don't have to be, it's not like a portrait of a face where I have to be exact. I can be a little bit more forgiving. Nobody knows this particular duck exactly how it looks or where its patterns are. So I can kind of play with it a little bit and be creative. So today I am going to start with the cobalt blue. I picked the cobalt blue because, as you know, with All of my drawings, portraits especially, I typically start with the eye or the main part of the subject because it makes me feel like if I can get the face and the center area, the main focal point, accurate, then I feel really good about the project and I will continue. I've never had to throw anything away, but if I'm going to throw it away, I want it to be, and start over, I'm going to want it to be the most important part tried first. Otherwise, if I did this whole background first, and then I end up doing the face, and the face looks horrible, and the background looks wonderful, it's a ruined piece. Now, it's just kind of my OCD. I've never had to throw a piece away, and it probably wouldn't be ruined anyway, but that's just how I manage things. So I'm going to start with a cobalt blue, and I'm just going to kind of start outlining the eye. Now, one thing you're going to notice is with the Albrecht Durer pencils, I do not have to be like I am with the with the polychromos pencils, because these are going to be wet, and it's going to change a lot once I put the water on there. So I don't have to worry 100% about how smooth everything is. And I'm going to be using quite a few brush strokes where I just lift and stop, lift and like this. Just I start here, go and lift, start and lift, start and lift. That's my brush stroke. I'm going to be using that quite a bit, where with polychromos, as you know, I tend to do the little ovals, and I'm coloring in the whole portion. Well, I'm not going to be coloring in this whole portion. I'm going to be laying down the color that I want, so that when I wet it with the watercolor brush, or a wet brush that's just dipped in water. The difference being, I have a couple of different brushes here. I have quite a few brushes. You can see that I'm going to be using. You're seeing this. The camera is looking straight down, so it might be kind of awkward, but I'm holding the whole jar. If I hold it straight, it's hard for you to see, so I'm tilting it here. I have a brush called a watercolor brush, or a water brush. It's actually got a squeegee side that disconnects, and you dip it into the water and squeeze it. It's by Durer. I think probably all the different art companies, pencil companies, and paint companies make them as well. But this is the one I particularly like. You dip it and squeeze it. It has water in it all the time. That way when I go like this and I squeeze it out a little bit, the water comes out on the brush. I don't have to keep dipping it in the water. So I will use this water brush quite a bit. I will also use plenty of different brushes, all different sizes, depending on the technique that I want to use. And I will just dip them in water and go right directly on top of my pencils. So what I'm doing is, instead of coloring it all in, I'm just laying the colors that I see I'm going to need. So as I go along, it's really important to make sure and fill in the areas. For instance, in here, if I just do this all blue and then I wet it with pencil with the brush, it's going to just look this color, and that's it. Well, I can see from the reference photo that the color of the eye is kind of varies between different variegated blues. So I'm going to use a variety of blues. I'm also going to choose, for instance, I'm going to choose the light ultramarine, and I'm going to go just on the inside and place a little bit. It won't be noticeably different, but when the water gets added, you'll see the blend that is different. And then I'm going to use a little bit of the sky blue. And now you'll notice with the Albrecht Durer pencils, I don't need them quite as sharp as I do with the polychromos pencils. Because they can be dull. I'm not trying to fill in every tiny little spot. I'm just trying to apply the color to the paper. So I'm going to put that sky blue right in the middle. And then I'm going to take a darker blue. And I think I will start with not these two. I think I'll start with the Delft blue and go next to the little iris area and kind of lay some of that in. And then I can see that it's a little bit light. I want the indanthrene blue because it's a little bit darker and it almost has like a black to it. And I'm going to put that right on the top of this other. And just kind of brushing it in. I don't have to press hard, just enough to lay the color on. The water is going to make it either dark or light, depending on how much water I apply. If I want it to be really intense, I can color it a little bit darker. So I know this area I'm going to want intense, whether I use the water or not. You do not have to always put water on top of the area that you color with the watercolor pencils. you can sometimes just leave them just like they are, instead of actually adding water. So if I wanted to, I could just leave that just like that and not add any water. I'm going to add water because I want to get that watercolor effect. Very close here, you can see, and I'm going to zoom in for a second so you can actually see what I just did even more clearly. Let me zoom in to the eye. And you can see that now. And what I've done is actually created, let me put my controller down. I've actually created this little area where it's light in the center, and I've kind of taken the indanthrene blue and the Delft blue, either one, doesn't really matter, it's what you want, and I'm putting these little lines in the eye. There's a little bit of different color. It's not all just solid light blue and then medium and then dark. It actually has these little offset colors. So I'm trying to copy it like I see it in the reference photo, because when I wet it, it'll look a little bit different, but I'm just trying to make the eye look as closely as I can to the watercolor reference photo. If you remember, if you watched the last video where I did the line drawing and put it on here, and when I created the composition for this mandarin duck, I actually made it into a watercolor with a filter on Photoshop. So I would have an idea of how I wanted the colors to be laid out and look. And it really helped me with my design composition. It's still up to me to create my watercolor from the duck, but that just gave me sort of an idea, a thought ahead of how I'm going to do it. So now I'm going to go ahead and look around the face, and I'm going to think about where I need to lay things. I'm not going to use white because the paper is already white. It's not a bright, bright white, and I may, in the end, after I'm done with this piece, if I feel like the white is not bright enough, I may go ahead and try to add in some white and see how it looks. But I didn't include it in my class, so anything that I add to this after the fact, I have to provide it for the students myself instead of having it sponsored by Faber-Castell. So I'm trying to stick to these colors because these are the color names that I gave them. So I'm going to take next the terracotta. And I see that it goes from a white area under the eye. There's some little lavender and stuff, but I'm not going to do that just yet. I just see that the terracotta starts here. So I'm going to kind of lay it on. Now, if I see an intense darker orange, I'll press a little harder in these areas. I'm still using that brush stroke. So I'm kind of just brushing it on. And then I'm going to a lighter area. When I see that it's a very light area, it doesn't need to be very dark, I'm not going to press as hard. In fact, it goes from this terracotta to an actual lighter color orange. So I'm going to use a cadmium orange, and I'm going to go right on top of the terracotta that I laid down, and just lay some of the color. It doesn't even have to be completely filled in, especially because in this area around where the orange I'm laying, I see in the reference photo there's like some white. So I'm going to leave some spots because I'm kind of almost making it splotchy. Now, the effect is going to be changed a lot when I start putting on the water, but this is just a guide, so I'm just laying color. If you think of it sort of, if you've ever done oils, if not, if you've ever painted, when you're laying on the color, sometimes you lay the color on the paper and then you blend it afterwards. Well, that's kind of what I'm doing, except I'll be blending it with water and a brush. So I am actually just wanting the colors to be in the right location. Now, in this area, it gets very pale orange and it fades to almost a white. So, and you notice I can kind of go all different directions. I don't want any deep lines because if I have a deep line, it's going to be harder to cover it. Unless I want a deep line because I see a deep line in my reference photo. So this is where you might use a sharper pencil. And then maybe, because I want it to be very uniform and not splotchy and not dark lines anywhere, I'm going to use my little oval stroke as if I was actually using polychromos because I want it super smooth in this area when I go over it with my water. So I'm just going to kind of use that color pencil stroke to kind of tone it, make it really light. I'm not pressing hard at all. It doesn't take very much at all to lay this really light color because I'm seeing such a light color in this area on the duck because it fades into the white around it. The white comes all the way down to here, so I'm going to go ahead and bring the orange down to where the white is down here. And I'm just laying it out very carefully. And I'll show you in a minute what happens when you go over it with water. And like I said, typically I would never put the water on until this whole piece is done. But for the sake of teaching, I'm going to do it this way. And it's not going to ruin my piece. I will just let it dry before I start again with the color pencil. So in general, I won't be doing it this way. So when you do it, you'll apply all this color first, and then you'll worry about coming back with the water after all the color is in the places where you want it. I'm also still using an angled desk, and I highly recommend that if you do this part with a dry pencil in an angled desk because it's going to make it easier on your back and easier to see your proportions, etc. Where when you get to the water, you'll probably want to lay it on a flat surface so it doesn't run. Now, I have a little bit more skill with this water and managing it, and I'm not afraid of it, so I'm going to go ahead and apply the water even though it's on a surface that's slanted, and it could run down, but I'm going to be able to stop it before that happens. And I'll demonstrate that. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to color this in. And I'm going dark where I see dark and light where I see light. There's some other colors involved here as well besides the orange. And I will incorporate those. The terracotta, I see that again in this spot here, the center spot that I kind of left white. It's actually a darker area of orange. So I'm going to go over it with the terracotta first. And then I'm going to go back over it again with the cadmium orange and fill it in kind of. Okay, so it's really light. You could pull in, if you were doing this on your own, you have your own Albrecht Durer pencils and you want to have it do something like this. This is actually my copyrighted photo. So I took this photo in Vegas. And so this photo is not for your reference, but I may be sharing some of my reference photos of this duck that you can draw. And when I start sharing those reference photos soon, you'll be able to use those. But if you did, I would probably incorporate a yellow in here as well. But because I didn't include that, when I just glanced at the picture and was in a really big hurry to come up with the colors I was going to need, I probably won't, unless I feel like it's really necessary, I won't include that color because I know that I had to have the colors up front. Okay, so I've got some of the orange laid in. I'm feeling kind of good about where I've got them all. Let me make it a little brighter right here. And now I'm going to use some of the deep red. It's not really a deep red here. The deep red is really more for over here, but I'm going to go ahead and put a tiny bit. It goes from red over here to here, so I'm just going to kind of pull it in so that it will blend together when I wet it. And it goes around the eye like this. I'm still using those brush strokes. And the red kind of mixes with the orange here. And there's some like little spaces that skip. And I'm just kind of brush stroking it in so that it blends, has a little bit of that pink tone into the area here. It's going to go into the feathers. Some of these feathers in here are very white. And so I'm just kind of laying them in. I'm getting a little touch of pink here. And a touch. Now, little touches go a long way because when I get the water on this, it's going to fade it and it's going to wash it out and you're going to start seeing the color that I'm placing here really easily. So you don't want to put this on real heavy, especially not in this area because this is all really light and fades into the bird's white color and up here and around here where it's going to be white. And sometimes I'll be able to make the white look whiter with all the vibrant, vivid colors around it. So I'm going to go ahead and skip. I'm going to use a little bit of I'm going to use some crimson, and I'm going to get it sharp. Let me move my camera a little bit to the right. So not that much. So you can kind of see what I'm doing with the beak, the top of the beak. I'm going to skip that little space because I know there's some white in there. And I'm going to kind of outline a little area with a crimson with a really sharp pencil. So I can kind of make an outline here. It goes to about right there. Now the crimson and all these colors are a little bit different than what my reference photo is. And like I said, if I was doing this on my own, I'd use a lot more than 21 pencils. But because I'm only doing this as a kind of a teaching tool for Art of the Carolinas for people who have never used the Albrecht Dürer pencils, it's not like something that I have the opportunity to give them 100 pencils, you know. So I want to give them the basic, the bare minimum amount of pencils that it would take to create this drawing. So oops, you can't see what I'm doing. So let me zoom out a little. Okay, so now I'm going to pull it back in here. And I'm just kind of adding the color wherever I see it on the duck. And I'm going to demonstrate so that we can, when I start getting the wash on for you to see how that works, I'm going to add a little bit of dark color here as well, even though I'm not quite done with that area. I'm going to use some of the magenta. It's a little bit hot pink kind of color here, right, that I'd like to try to capture. The magenta is a little purple, so I'm going to pull it in right here, right next to that beak area. Instead of using black, it's very dark, it's almost black right here, but instead of using black, I'm going to use this magenta. We can always add black last, but I want to get the dark magenta in first so that it has that underneath the black. It's always much prettier to use black if you've got purples and red hues and things under the black. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm pressing a little harder with this because this is a really intense color right here. It's dark and it's not going to be a real light area. Okay, so I'm going to pull some of that up in here and then just kind of stop. Now, ideally, I would have a really nice pink, but I don't have it. Instead, I have the crimson and the magenta. And so I'm just using crimson and magenta for these areas because that's what I have. I'd like to put a hotter pink in here, but there was just a stopping point I had to get to. I mean, I have so many choices and colors that I could apply. And it was just really hard to pick a few, but I wanted to keep it reasonable so that it was an affordable class. People didn't have to buy you didn't have to go and buy a whole supply kit because Faber-Castell is offering to sponsor this class. And so I'm just doing the best I can with what colors I have, even though I would really like to put a pink in here. We're using purple. I can take some of my crimson and I can use a little bit of it. Actually, maybe instead of the crimson, I can use some of the deep red to give it a little bit of pinker look. It'll still look more red, not pink, but by the time they mix together, I'm hoping to get a little bit of a brighter color of it. Sometimes I can add a little bit of the orange. I'm going to add the cadmium orange in here, and that will sometimes brighten up that area once it blends with those other colors. So I'm going to kind of see if I can lay that in there too. It's just a combination of these colors, deep red. And you can play with this on a piece of scratch paper. You don't have to use the actual piece of paper that you're drawing your piece on to test these colors. You can actually do it right on a scratch paper, but I'm just kind of just winging it because it doesn't really matter. It's a watercolor. I'm looking for that vibrant, excited, kind of different look. I'm not looking for photorealism. I want the creativity, and I'm okay with it not being exactly like the reference photo. This reference photo for me in this case is really just so I have an idea of the shape of the duck, the colors where the duck in general, so that he will actually look like a mandarin duck. And I'm not worried too much about it being perfect. I'm mixing these colors, the crimson now. I'm going to use the crimson right along the edge, kind of a dark line there. Crimson kind of comes back and has a really dark, heavy area. And then there's a mix of like some pinks and dark. So where I see that it's lighter, I'll leave some little spots in there. I can fill those in with other colors and with just water just to kind of fade it. And I kind of know where it goes here. I'm just applying the color. That's really all I'm doing, is trying to get it similar to what I see in the reference photo. I'm going to use some of the cadmium orange now. Again, it's a kind of a bright orange, so I'm going to put it in here, like a few spots here and there. So when I use the water to brush it together, it'll have that orange. I'll leave some little white spaces too, though. I'm going to use now a little bit, I see some purple, so I'm going to use the purple violet. And I see some right along the edge of the eye. I'm barely going to add any there because it's not very much. I'm going to skip a little bit here. And there's also a tiny tad bit of purple here, but it's so light that I don't want very much color on there because it's mostly white up here. And the same with the area kind of right here. I start to see this fade. So I'm using the light ultramarine and it kind of fades from white into the darker blue area. So I'm going to kind of lay that on the edge of that. And that'll kind of fade with that red too and give it a little purpley look here. So I'm going to kind of go pull that in. And then I'm going to use a little bit of the indanthrene blue because it gets to a really dark blue over here, almost kind of black. We'll probably have some black in here as well. And I'm just going to kind of lay a little piece. Now I've got a long ways to go. I would finish a lot more of this, but I want to give you an opportunity to see how I'm laying it down and what it looks like when I wet it. And I'm about to start wetting it because I'm getting close to my time limit for other medium drawings that I'm doing your videos for. Mostly I concentrate on color pencil, but I do love these other mediums, and since I'm teaching them, I want to give you the opportunity to see how I work with these different mediums. So this time I'm going to make a squiggly line, very clearly squiggly in the reference photo, and I'm just going to kind of fill it in up to that squiggly line so you can see some of the dark kind of come in play. And it also gets some of that almost a teal green, and the color that I chose for that, I have multiple greens that I chose. But I'm going to use the middle phthalo blue, and I'm going to put a little bit of that in here to give it that kind of teal look. And I'll add a little bit of green as well. I'll just kind of pull this all in. And there's a little bit of more of the ultramarine, maybe the cobalt blue. Cobalt blue is a good color right here. Very cobalt blue matches the eye, so I'm going to kind of pull that cobalt blue in here. And I'll even take some of the indanthrene and continue that little squiggly area up there. And it's kind of almost black in this couple of these areas. And this cobalt blue will get a lot more purpley, so I'll add some purple colors to make it even more rich. But just to start with, I'm just filling that in with some blue so I can get it wet and show you how it works. I'm also going to pull in a little bit of green there. I'm going to use the green opaque. It's the chromium green opaque. And I'm going to fill that in right here a little bit, just so we get a touch of green and a touch of green here. But I don't really have time to continue too much of this. And I will go ahead with a black. And I'll take a little bit of the black and fill it in here where I see kind of a squiggly line. And then it has a black here and a nice, more solid black here. And a little black here. And it goes up and has a lot more vivid colors. But this black I'm going to lay in here. But I'm going to stop, even though I normally would continue this whole bird. I'm going to put a little bit of black along here too, just because I know it's so dark in this area. And now normally, like I said, I would finish this whole area. I'm not going to do that because I want you to see what happens when I get it wet. I'm just going to go ahead and put this back on there. Okay, so now I've got just laid out the color, and I'm going to, for this experiment, I'm going to show you what happens with the water brush. Sorry, my glassine paper is making noise. For the water brush, I squeeze it onto my hand a little bit so that I can see that it's wet. That's all I really need, just to make sure it's kind of wet. That's why I use my hand, because I know it's wet. Now I dry my hand off, and then I'm going to, once I saw that it was wet, squeezed it right there. I've got water on the tip, and I'm just going to kind of go on the area. I'm going to start with the eye, But I'm going to have to change my brush to use this area because this brush has been using some green and I don't want to mix my brushes. So I'm just going to very lightly add a tiny bit of water right there. Okay, I'm going to let it kind of wipe it off and then teeny tiny bit of water here. Now if you're on a flat surface, it's much easier. You don't have to worry about it dripping. But for me, I have to be a little more careful. But I'm just going to dab on tiny bits of water just to kind of smooth it a little bit. I'm holding a rag nearby in case it starts to run. It's a clean cotton cloth. I actually use these cotton diapers that I get from Walmart, and I can kind of hold it close by, and that way if anything happens. Now I looked at this, I tested my water brush. It doesn't look like it has any color that's going to fade. So on my hand I tested it. So I'm going to go ahead and use it directly on this part. And I'm just going to real lightly move it around. You can see how that orange kind of almost gets that yellow effect that I really wanted yellow, and it looks like I might not need it. Now I'm going to kind of pull it up into the white because there's no pencil there, but it'll fade naturally. And with watercolor, it's kind of nice to leave some of these little lines that how it kind of fades together because it gives it a real watercolor effect. Like it just kind of does its own thing sometimes, and you just kind of go with it and allow it to create pretty lines and textures in the area that you're working with. Now, if you see that some of your areas are a little bit too dark compared to your reference, you can take like cotton rag and just stamp it a little bit. That way it kind of takes up a little bit of the color. And you're just going to kind of very slowly and very lightly with a not very wet brush. You don't want your brush very wet at all. And you can use it to your advantage to kind of pull the colors together. So I'm not going to clean my brush at all. I'm just going to kind of pull those colors into the orange. Okay, and then in this area, I'm going to keep with the same brush. I'm not getting it cleaned or anything. I'm just going to go right along the edge and going in the direction of the feathers. I'm going to just keep it coming. Just like that, leaving a little bit of white space because I kind of see that in the reference photo that there's some little lighter spaces that are not colored in. Okay, now if this whole piece was already drawn, it would be a little bit easier because everything would be ready for me to just start. All I would be doing is starting top down and getting this watercolor ready, or just filling it in with the watercolor. But because it's not quite all drawn, I'm having to just do this little piece. I'll let this completely dry before I even lay out. Now I'm going to get this, so much red is on here, I'm going to wipe some of it off on my cloth and get my brush squeezed again to get some fresh water so that when I go over this area, I don't pull that red into it. I didn't want red in there. Okay, so just kind of lightly touching. If I touch the red, it'll pull the red down into the beak. So I'm just going to kind of stop there and let that, I'm going to get the red off my brush. And when I say get the red off my brush, what I'm actually doing is just squeezing a little bit more water out. See if you can see it. Until it's clear. And then I'm going to go back over it and darken this area here. It's a dark area. When I put the water on it, it gets kind of more intense. And then I'm going to continue up here with this, since I have dark on the brush already. Just going to kind of fill this in where I saw it, like I see it in the reference photo. Now I see some areas that are very dark and some that are very light, and I will continue adding color on top of this once it dries to get it a little darker if it wasn't quite dark enough. So there's some there that's going to be very light, and I want to get rid of this because I want a lighter teal color. So I'm just going to like blot it once. I'm going to come over here and put some of this down. Now, another thing you can do with Albrecht Durer is you can actually go right on top of wet with a dry pencil, and it will create a different effect as well. So try that on a scratch paper and see how you like it. It creates kind of an interesting effect when it's already wet, and then you go back with a pencil on top. It just kind of melts into it, and it can create some pretty cool effects. and a little bit different color. So you can use that as well, that technique of actually adding pencil right on top of the wet to get more of the darker depth color as well. Put some of that heavy blue. If you dab it on there whenever it's wet, it kind of actually is like applying a thick paint. So I'm going to go back over this area a little bit. And trying to give it some color, contrast. I'm carefully trying to watch my values because my values are important, more important than the color is the value. So some of this area needed to be a little lighter. I'm going to pick it up by putting more water on it. It's a little bit dark in that area. And I'll then take my cloth and just pat it so I can get more of the light color. It's a little darker than I wanted. So I kind of want this color. I'm seeing this more, this middle phthalo blue. And I'm just going to kind of go on top of the watered area. I'm dabbing instead of drawing because I don't want to rip the paper. So I'm kind of dabbing. That pencil will just kind of melt on the wet paper. So I'm just kind of dabbing it instead of drawing. And that way I can get the color more accurate. And then I'm going to use a little bit of the Delft blue because I want this darker blue right here, right on top of the wet. There we go. Okay, that feels a little better to me, and I can touch it up as I go along. I can add a little bit brighter blues wherever I want them. I can add a little bit of purple if I want to brighten it up. It will eventually won't be wet enough to take that color, so you'll have to get it wet again and then put a little bit of sky blue or whatever. But you can really change it up depending on how you want. It's pretty easy to work with. You can add some blacks. And what I'll do is a lot of times after it's dry, completely dry, I'll still need that extra contrast. I'll go back in with a very sharp, on top of an already dry area with a very sharp Albrecht pencil and put in these tiny little sharper lines for contrast. And I won't wet those. I'll just leave them like that. Because that way they won't change. And I can get very tiny little details that way. Around the eye, for instance. And treat them sort of like they're a polychromos pencil. And I can even go on top of it with black to get that value darker there. So just because they are watercolor pencils doesn't mean that everywhere you touch has to be a watercolor, has to put a water applied. You don't have to do that. You're only going to do that where you see it and where you need it wet because you want that effect. If you don't want the effect and you need something darker like I'm doing here, you can just use these pencils in general. So there's some like different little lines in his eyes. And you can also erase the watercolor pencil very easily with the Derwent battery operated eraser. It picks up really well. So I'll probably continue this and finish this drawing because I have to have this quickly done for the Art of the Carolinas. I won't be able to continue to save it, but I can show you other 15-minute, 20-minute sections of doing this piece for future other medium videos. But just for now, you can kind of see what's going to happen with the overall piece. And once I'm done, it'll really come together and look like a really pretty watercolor duck. And I'll show you real quickly. You can see that it's getting very close to my reference photo. Let me zoom out so you can see what I'm doing. So now by putting it there, you can kind of look and see what my goal is, that overall look and feel. And as I continue to build up the colors around the face and up in the blues up here and the reds, it will start to look more and more like my reference photo.